Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of 2025. Welcome to 2025. We're excited to have you here with us today. We're going to be talking about something very, very neat. Um, I need to bring up my slides though. Thank you, wonderful producer in the back. We appreciate you. Shout out to Nick. Everybody give Nick some claps in the chat if you can. Today, we're going to be talking about hyperscale control and how we are helping to really solve the full cloud story. If you have any questions throughout this, you can scan this QR code right up here. You can scan, ask questions. We have some questions that already came in as part of the registration. Thank you for those of you who wrote questions, but we will get to those at the end. For those of you who have been here with us for maybe a little bit, we started with in 2021 with a concept we called cloud different. And the whole point of cloud different was that it had the ability to unlock the cloud operating model. And for a lot of clients that we talked to, a lot of them got stuck when they were trying to move from on-prem into a cloud environment for various reasons. They either didn't have the skill set, they started making their moves and they found out it was too expensive, or they moved into a cloud and were focusing on doing all the modernization, but weren't really giving up anything they had before. So they were kind of straddling the two environments, and it was really, really painful for them. And as part of this, we started talking through the concept of cloud different and cloud smarter, safer, and simplified. Smarter being, how do we help you figure out what are your costs? Where are you spending your money? If you're putting it into a hyperscale cloud, are you optimizing your costs there? And then safer, wrapping security around your cloud environment, whether that's on-prem or in a hyperscale cloud. And cloud simplified, which was to simplify the operations. How do you manage and monitor and patch all of your things across those environments? And it became something where, as we were talking to clients, they were saying, hey, this actually is beneficial and helpful. And really, what it came down to was having the ability to put the right workload in the right cloud. So, when we looked at what we did with Expedient Enterprise Cloud and our private clouds, they were very much focused on things like current applications. So, things like virtual machines that off the shelf software running in a Windows environment, really static workloads made more sense in a predictable environment like EEC or our private cloud. And then you add in things like containers where you could run those on top of enterprise cloud, or even things like physical workloads with colocation, where we could blend all of that together for the workloads that don't need a hyperscale cloud, but still wanted a cloud operating model to move into the OpEx space. When we look at hyperscale, we see things like microservices, which is a more modern architecture of I break my application down into a number of smaller services that I can patch and maintain individually. And usually this is where containers and Kubernetes comes into play. And in a hyperscale environment, that can even mean things like serverless, like AWS Lambda, where I'm taking advantage of the platforms that are out in a hyperscale cloud to be the basis for what my application runs on top of. And things like variable workloads or seasonal workloads. I'm looking at you, retail customers who have the big holiday shopping season. That's the big one that everybody thinks about. But health insurance, or health insurance providers have open enrollment from October to January, where every single one of their members has to log in and do a re-enrollment. That is a huge amount of resources that are needed for a very, very brief period of time. And so how do you enable those seasonal workloads and align your spend to your usage, which is really what a lot of people went to the cloud to have? I want to be able to be super flexible, that if I need more resources, I can get them, I can use them. But during my normal run and maintain, I'm actually, kind of keeping it very tight. And when we look at things like big data, AI, and machine learning, yes, we were talking about AI in 2021. When you start to dig into that, you see, hey, these are things where I need to put up a ton of capital for all of the hardware to run all of that. Big data meaning hundreds of terabytes of storage, things like AI, machine learning, where you need GPUs, you need a lot of compute in order to do those things that you may not need all the time. You want to just rent the capability, excuse me, to be able to do all of those. That's a big deal. And that's where hyperscalers really come in. They have the ability to give you capacity at scale across a global footprint and really make sure that your workloads land where you need them to land. But they only do that with just providing you with those resources are. It's up to you to figure out the rest. And then we wrapped all of that with our multi-cloud tooling. So multi-cloud management, security, cost management, data management, and networking. And this works out really well in terms of telling a hybrid cloud story. And one of the things that we saw from ending last year and coming into this year is that all of the analysts are saying that the future of cloud is hybrid, which is a lot like what we just talked about, right? Landing the right workload in the right cloud. Expedient, we're never wrong, we're just early. And so things like having hyperscale cloud and private multi-tenant VMware or Nutanix cloud and traditional on-premises infrastructure means I have multiple options where I can optimize where my workloads are running and what they are running with in order to ensure that my business has the best availability, the best cost benefits, and the best access for my end users to make sure that they're able to get their work done. And so when we talk about this, though, this isn't easy. If it were easy, everybody would have already done it already. Because a lot of times when we start talking about cloud, it's a strategy conversation, right? What are you willing to invest in? And when I talk about investment, it's not just money. It's not just, okay, what am I paying for? What am I, what services am I paying for? It's more, what are you willing to invest in? Are you willing to invest the time into your staff to ensure that they have those capabilities, right? Because the way that things run on-prem and the way they run in a hyperscale environment aren't exactly the same thing. One of the things that a lot of people did in 2009 and 2010 was they heard, hey, if I go to the cloud, I will be more agile. I will save money. And where they heard that from was developers who were telling their stories of their successes with places like AWS and saying, oh, we went to the cloud and this is what we got out of it. What they forget is the second half of that sentence, which was we went to the cloud and we were more agile and we saved money because we weren't tied to what our IT teams wanted to do. But everybody forgets the second half of that question and they just hear, if I want to be more agile and save money, I need to go to the cloud. And so everybody went out to the cloud and we're trying to do the same things that they do on-prem out in a hyperscale cloud, and that doesn't work. It causes a lot of heartburn. You don't get to maximize any of those capabilities that you have out there, and you end up spending more because you're trying to do all the same things you did before. Like we have to wait 2 weeks. Well, this workload is sitting there running, the meter is running for 2 weeks. Well, we can't shut it down for 2 weeks because of some process we wrote. That's a problem. And so when it comes to making it less expensive, it may or may not be. There's a lot of folks right now who are looking at hyperscale as an option because of the Broadcom changes and saying, okay, well, does that number align now? It may or it may not. And hey, I have some things that live in Azure. Should I just expand that as part of whatever my next strategy will be? And a lot of that strategy comes back to, do my applications support that or fit there? How do I handle backups and disaster recovery? Because the way I do disaster recovery on-prem may or may not be the same way I do it in a hyperscale cloud. And then how do I secure and monitor all of that going forward? Do I have all the necessary skill sets to do that? And really what it turns into is, how do you think through a migration? And how do you actually make that successful without impacting anything else? Because a lot of those businesses, like I mentioned, they started doing it and then realized about, a year in that they were kind of straddling both sides of on-prem versus hyperscale, and were starting to have an impact on what the business needed from them. They couldn't maintain both, and that's where a lot of that stress came in. And it got me thinking about migrations. Have you ever seen a picture of a migratory bird, like a mallard by itself? You're seeing one now. I look for a lot of images for these sorts of for our webinars and other pieces of content because I like trying to make, a story that can help explain what's going on here. I'm usually pretty quick about finding these things, and it took me a solid 20 minutes to find a picture of a solo migratory bird because they don't fly alone very often, and there's reasons for that. There's an old saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And when you look at migratory birds, they are going fast when they go alone, when they need to get away from a predator or they need to move to a new place to feed. They can go fast by going alone. They can just go to where they are. The problem is flying takes a lot of energy. It's really, really hard to do. And so because of that, trying to go very far is a whole lot of energy exertion. And so when you look at migratory birds, they don't fly alone. And there's some birds like Canadian geese where they fly great distances. Ontario to Florida is about 1,000 miles, and they fly that way south. They fly right over my house and they fly south for the winter because it's warmer. And so, in order to do that, they have to fly in distinct patterns, like the flying V. And when you look at those birds in the front, those first 6 birds that are up there, they are breaking up the air for the birds that are behind them to make it easier for the rest of them to make that journey. And if you look at the birds that are in the middle of the V there, they are the ones who were previously breaking up the wind, and they are actually getting a break from doing that. And this entire group of birds will fly together all the way down to their destination of Florida or the South, where they can remain warm for the winter. And they'll turn around and do it all again on the way back. But this is how migratory birds work. They can't go alone. One of those birds is only getting to about, I don't know, buffalo. But all of them together will make it all the way further south. And that's where we come into play. We are just like you going together to a hyperscale world because we are aiming for the right workload to the right cloud at the right cost and simplifying those operations the entire way through. That is what hyperscale control is all about. Now, what is hyperscale control? What it is a series of services. And we'll talk through what those mean here in a moment. But they are a series of services. And when we look at that series of services, it really comes down to our ability to deliver things like professional services on top of a hyperscale cloud. So when I look at my cloud platforms, let's say, I have the ability to have AWS, Azure, and GCP along with Expedient Private Cloud, Enterprise Cloud, Edge, and colocation, where I can put the right workload where it needs to be, and then put assessments, training, education, and professional services on top of that to ensure that it's going to go to the right place and that it's going to stay there, and then manage those services on top of that. So things like being able to do OS patching and monitoring, application level monitoring and logging, and handle all of that across those platforms, no matter where they are, right? We've done a really great job of that 80 to 90% that lands on a traditional platform like VMware or Nutanix. And we're taking it to the next level and scaling our capabilities to go into a hyperscale world. It comes down to 4 main pillars, right? Cloud discovery, cloud migration, cloud management, and cloud professional services. Each one of these is a way for us to help you along that journey, whether that's just getting started all the way to, hey, it's day 100 and I need help. It is a massive undertaking to be able to do all of this, but we're here to help at each step of the way. So cloud discovery, this is where we'll start every single time. And it really comes down to what clouds and what workloads are you running? A lot of organizations have a little bit in AWS. They have a little bit in Azure because they've put things out there already, right? I have Azure AD. I have these credits as part of my Microsoft agreement. I should go use some of this Azure stuff, right? It's paid for. Same thing with AWS. There's a lot of organizations where a developer went out with a credit card and stood up an AWS environment, and now they have workloads that run in AWS. Every single organization we've talked to has a little bit somewhere, right? So where are those workloads today? We also know that most organizations are still on-prem. 70 to 80% of workloads still live on-prem today. So there's nothing that's really changing there. It's where should they live, and are you getting the most out of those things, right? So if a workload lives on-prem, but it needs to be able to scale up and scale down, you either need to buy all the hardware to do that, which is very expensive and in some ways wasteful because you have the hardware just sitting there doing its thing and not necessarily getting the value out of it because 9 months out of the year, it's not doing anything or it's not being fully utilized. If I flip that around to something like a hyperscale environment, am I running commodity off the shelf software on a Windows machine that doesn't change ever? Is that the best place for that workload as well? Like, it's a static workload. It's not taking advantage of any of the capability of that cloud. How can we maximize the capabilities? How can we leverage those capabilities? And that's not necessarily to say that you have to only put certain workloads in certain places. If you have a global footprint and you don't have a data center in, let's say, Singapore, and you need to run that static Windows server in Singapore, you're still taking advantage of the capabilities because you don't have a data center there, but Azure does, right? Does that make sense? That's really where we're here to look at. Understanding where all those things are, and also then saying, where should they go? And then when we look at migration, it's how do we take that discovery that we did and actually implement it and put it into place, right? What's the best way to get there? I've got a fantastic delivery team that does migrations every single day into our platform. Most organizations only get to do a migration like once every 4 to 5 years at most. We're able to do it every single day. So we know all the nooks and crannies, we know all the use cases, we know all the goofy stuff that you're probably going to run into. So we have the capability to get there faster and with less effort because we're taking care of that migration for you and ensuring that it works the first time. But there's also some questions around, should an application move as is, or should you modernize on the way there? And understanding, is it worth doing the modernization, and then what needs to be done to do the modernization? So things like, hey, this application we already moved into microservices. It doesn't need to be modernized. You already did it. What are the best platforms to run on? Or maybe you have a, old Windows application that runs on Microsoft SQL Server and you want to move that into Azure. Okay. Should you use a Windows machine running SQL Server, or should you use Azure SQL and just use database as a service? Or if you want to move from a monolithic application into a microservices architecture, what are the services and capabilities you need to have in place in order to make that code change to make that modernization happen? So CI/CD pipelines, images, what platforms and services will you be running on top of? Are those Kubernetes platforms, serverless platforms? What does that look like for you? And help you walk through that migration and help set all of the things in place from a modernization layer so that you can make those changes and make that happen all the way through. We have deep expertise on this. Being able to go in and look at applications and figure out what is the best path for getting to from where you are to where you want to go and getting that outcome correctly and safely the first time. But it's not just about getting there. There's a lot of organizations that have said, hey, we went all in on the cloud. We got to the cloud. And then they ran into some trouble because things didn't work the same way that they did before. Things aren't the same in a hyperscale cloud as they are in traditional on-premises infrastructure. There are changes that you have to make both in terms of technology, but also operationally. And so what we wanted to do was to enable day two and beyond, enable you to be able to be successful going forward. And so part of those professional services that we can offer are things like training to help you understand, here's how things work in Azure. Here's what these services do. Here's how you can figure out what to do inside of these environments. But also we can do 24/7 monitoring, patching, and management of these platforms so that you can focus on the things that matter, like the applications that are running on top, and be able to call us at 2 a.m. when you say, hey, I'm having a problem, I need help. That's what we're here to help with. We are trying to simplify management across all of the clouds and platforms because we recognize that AWS and Azure and GCP, they're not exactly the same. And those three aren't the same as what you would run on-prem with VMware or Nutanix. They're all different. They all operate slightly differently. So how do we help you simplify that management across those various environments? And a lot of that comes down to having the expertise on our side and knowing what to do in each of those environments so that you're successful going forward. It's not necessarily here's one piece of software that we're going to put in front of everything. It's enabling a number of services around that to make sure that everything is taken care of. And because everybody's slightly different, we'll be honest here, right? I'm not saying that there's necessarily snowflakes out there, but we run into a lot of individualized platforms, right? Applications that were written over the last 10 to 15 years that matched your specific business, but nobody else has, right? And everybody feels like they're different. And in a lot of ways, they're right and wrong, right? We've run into a lot of the same applications, the same accounting systems that run across a bunch of different clients. We've seen that. Database platforms that everybody uses. We've seen those. But in certain instances, there are applications where you say, okay, I want to move this into a hyperscale cloud, but this is critical to my business. How do I enable a disaster recovery plan? How do I ensure that in the event of some sort of issue that I can bring my application back up quickly? How do I ensure the most availability there? And that's not necessarily just, hey, just use this service and it'll be fine. It's, okay, what are the individual components of this and how do we ensure that that's going to work? So things like I moved into a microservices architecture and I use database as a service. In this availability zone, that's where prod lives. But if I want to move that over to another one, or I want to move that into another region to be more region available, how do I replicate that data over? How do I ensure that my application is consistent? So if I log in on one side, I get the same data as if I logged in on the other side. And in the event of a disaster, do I have enough capacity to ensure that all of my users are able to access that platform? That's where these professional services come in. We want to build solutions that are tailored to you and your organization's unique challenges. So, what does a hybrid cloud really look like? Looks like this, right? You have VMware or Nutanix in an Expedient private cloud, or maybe even on prem, leveraging virtual machines and containers. This is the same applications that you're utilizing now. But we also have our cloud interconnects. They're part of our cloud on-ramps that we've had for years to connect from our data centers into hyperscalers through managed direct connects. So direct connects, express routes, cloud interconnects, depending on which cloud you talk to, their terms for directly connecting into those instead of coming in through the internet. One of the big things that you can use with that are discounted egress fees. You don't pay the full egress fee as you would if you were going out through AWS's internet. You pay their direct connect fees, which are usually like 40% less. So there is a huge cost savings there if you're moving data between multiple environments. But when we look at things like Azure, a whole lot of organizations have Office 365, which utilizes Azure AD, Entra ID. It's the same thing, but they're utilizing Azure services. They already have all the identity pieces there, and a lot of the Microsoft security tooling now, things like Intune and Defender, are all running through the Azure console now. So they're now, you have a lot of people who are looking at Azure. So how do we integrate that in to the rest of the environment? You may even have things that are file shares off of SharePoint, databases that you're using with Azure SQL because you have software mobility in that way. Excuse me. And then you have applications that have been refactored. So I take my ERP system that I had on-prem before and we put it in AWS. Well, now that that's inside of AWS, I now need to make sure that that's all managed as well. I might be utilizing Lambda and RDS and EC2 instances to make up that application, but I need to manage all of that together. This is what a hybrid cloud looks like, but we can wrap our services around that to ensure that the management and the monitoring of these platforms going forward is secure all the way through. This is something that I've been talking about for quite some time now, which is I call finishing the story. Back in 2021, when we initially rolled out the whole cloud different story, it was based around all the things that we did well and showing what the hyperscalers did well, right? So that black outline is what the hyperscalers do well, and all the things in red are what we did well. And we cover a whole lot of the bases, but a lot of organizations needed help with the stuff that was in the outline. And we didn't have a really great rest of the story. We kind of got the chapter 5 of a 6-chapter book. And what this service allows us to do now is finish that story. I now have the ability to say, if you want to go to a cloud, we can help. If you need help along your cloud journey, no matter what cloud it is, Expedient has a number of services to assist along that way. And I'm very, very proud of this because it is something that we have been working on for quite some time, and we're now able to deliver it in full. We want to bring the right workload to the right cloud with the right cost, simplify those operations the entire way through, and really deliver that full stack cloud service provider that you have come to expect from us at Expedient. With that, I'll open it up for questions now. We're going to take the ones that were in the registration first. If there's any other questions, we can slide those in now. But we can go ahead and take the first question here. How do you capture existing system configurations and migrate those systems to your cloud? This comes down to us sitting down with you in the initial kind of pre-sales process of understanding what are your workloads. And this is something we've done forever with our cloud, but we're extending it with Hyperscale. So sitting down and saying, okay, what are your applications? What are your VMs? What are your operating systems that you're running? How many of those are out of support? Do you want to move to new versions of the OS because you want to be able to support those in a more longer term fashion? Do you need help with the management along that way? We have a series of tools that we use with ourselves today for our platforms. And as part of the hyperscale environments, we will be using some of those tools, but also adding in more, traditional assessments, interviews, talking through things with stakeholders, because there's more to it when you get to the application layer than just the operating system layer. So that's something that we'll be working on as we go forward. If you want to learn more, you can talk about that. There was another question. Oh, there's one. What non-VM related management does this offer? This is a great question because we've spent a lot of our time as Expedient focusing really at that VM and operating system level. And when we go into a hyperscale environment, there is a kind of a jump that happens because you start to move up the stack into the application level, because from an infrastructure level, the individual services, like, you're not worried about the hypervisor level anymore because the compute instances can run there. Same with the Kubernetes instances, or even the database level. Like, I get a database. I'm not worried about what the database server is or what hardware it's running on or anything like that. I'm worried about, is my database available? Yes or no. Right. So being able to offer application level logging and monitoring was really, really important to us. And so we can do that as part of our services with things like the Kubernetes services, the database services, and even things going into serverless in terms of helping to manage around those workloads as part of the offering. And if you have more direct needs, we can definitely talk about what we can do there. We have two more questions here. This one here, I'm going back to private cloud, hybrid, 90% private, 10% public, leaving AWS and Azure because it was too costly, and I'm leaning towards Nutanix as my solution. Why should I choose VMware? It's a great question. I'll give you a short answer now, but I'm going to need you to stay tuned for February, because we're going to talk a lot more about optionality coming up Thursday, February 20th at 1 p.m. But I think the big thing here is, where is your familiarity? If you want to go back, if you want to come back to a private cloud offering, going into Nutanix is a great option. It is a incredibly simple platform with a ton of power. In fact, on our platform, we've had a number of clients say, like, my applications have literally never run faster. That's a real quote, which felt great. But in terms of VMware, VMware is making a move into building a full private cloud stack with Cloud Foundation. And so there is value there if you are familiar with the VMware ecosystem, if you're familiar with the VMware environments that you've run in the past. Not a lot has changed there directly. As Cloud Foundation rolls out, you'll likely see more changes. But it comes down to, do you want to go to the platform that versus the one that is potentially better for you, or the one that you're already leaning towards now? But we will talk way more about this next month, about how hyperscale or how hypervisors work, and how choosing your platform can work out for you. There was one last question here, which was, does the control platform offer a single pane of glass for control and visibility across multiple cloud service provider platforms? The answer is yes. There is a single pane of glass platform that we will be using as part of this. But there's also not just the technology and the single pane of glass, there's also the single set of services, the single organization that is helping to enable all of this. All of the technology things that we do are cool. A lot of this comes down to people. It comes down to being able to be available to help. It comes down to helping you set up the right outcomes. Seeing all of your instances or workloads across all of your clouds is neat. But in the instance of needing to call someone at 2 a.m, the tool doesn't necessarily do that. We are there to help. And so we are leaning very much on our people, our capabilities to deliver on top of that. And I think that is a massive differentiator beyond just providing you with a single tool. That is our time for this month. I'm very appreciative of all of you for coming. Thank you for all of the questions. This has been really great. We will see you Thursday, February 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern, noon Central, 10 a.m. Pacific. Join us for more. We have a lot more coming this year. We have a lot of things to talk about this year. We will see you. We're going to be at a number of national events this year, and I look forward to talking with all of you. We'll see you next time.